American politics has been getting pretty weird lately, but this old resurfaced story really did surprise me. Marco Rubio, currently the Secretary of State for Donald Trump, owns a golden sword that once belonged to Chang, a mystical Chinese warrior. He was given this sword by Jeb Bush in 2005 when Jeb was the governor of Florida and Rubio was the state's Speaker of the House. For those unfamiliar with American politics, basically each state is a miniature version of the federal government and has its own legislature with its upper and lower houses, except for Nebraska for some reason. And the Florida legislature is where Jeb Bush gifted Chang's golden sword to Rubio. But who was the mystical Chang, and how did Jeb obtain his sword? Here's a quote from Jeb about giving the sword to Rubio. "I told you that we were going to unleash Chang on the election, and Marco, being a relatively young guy, didn't know who Chang was. Chang was a mystical warrior. Chang is someone who believes in conservative principles, believes in entrepreneurial capitalism, believes in moral values that underpin a free society. I rely on Chang with great regularity in my public life. Chang, this mystical warrior, has never let me down. I'm going to bestow to you the sword of a great conservative warrior. I know that Chang won't let you down, and you won't let him down either." This Chang guy sounds like a cross between a general from the Three Kingdoms period and a 1980s Republican. In 2012, when Marco Rubio was being considered for the vice presidential nominee, he said that he thought that Chang was a fictional character from Jeb's imagination. But if you know anything about Chinese history, you'll know that Chang is supposed to be Chiang Kai-shek, a Chinese general and politician who led China from 1928, was the leader of China in World War II, but then lost the Chinese Civil War to Mao Zedong and retreated to Taiwan in 1949, where he ruled until his death in 1975. He was popular among conservative Republicans during the Cold War, and those conservative voices often called on the US government to unleash Chang on Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communists. And Jeb's father, President George H.W. Bush, not to be confused with Jeb's brother, President George W. Bush, would threaten to unleash Chang in tennis matches. Jeb's description of Chang isn't 100% accurate to the real Chiang Kai-shek. I mean, he did kill communists, but he wasn't exactly a conservative, at least not in the American sense. He was allied with communists earlier in his career, and he wasn't really a free market capitalist. There was a lot of government intervention in the economy, though there was some economic liberalization later in Taiwan. He was also a dictator, though it is worth noting that he was the type of dictator who didn't view dictatorship as something that was supposed to be permanent. He was a staunch anti-communist, and that's what earned him a lot of fans in America. When Chiang Kai-shek was still alive, he preferred Republicans over Democrats. In the 1948 presidential election, Chiang Kai-shek didn't come out and say that he wanted Republican Thomas Dewey to defeat Democrat Harry Truman, but it was pretty obvious who he wanted to win. Dewey was unsuccessful in 1948, and so were Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio when both of them ran in the Republican primaries in 2016. In 1971, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia gifted Chiang Kai-shek a golden sword, but it's not the same sword that Jeb Bush gave to Marco Rubio. And I don't think the Chang family has been going around giving away swords to foreigners anyway. Back when Gawker was still around, it ran an article on this subject. According to a That's China magazine article from 2015, a commenter on the Gawker article with the username Do suggested that the mystical Chang who Bush Sr. invoked in his tennis matches wasn't the former Chinese leader. He said that it might have been Michael Chang, an actual tennis player who was an American of Taiwanese descent. But Jeb had said that Marco Rubio didn't know about Chang because he was a relatively young guy. And Marco Rubio was older than Michael Chang. Anyway, the story about the Golden Sword was almost certainly made up, either by Bush Sr. or by Jeb. But I do wonder where that sword actually came from. I've got no idea. If someone who is more familiar with Bush family lore could tell me, that would be great. I certainly didn't expect to ever talk about Jeb Bush on a channel that's mostly about Taiwan. Next video should be about Chang Wei Kuo.